Hi, folks. Welcome back. Here we are with our next recorded lecture. I'm your instructor, Victor Fabiana Bundesguerra. This is Philosophy 110, Introduction to Philosophy. Today, we're going to be talking about Miranda Fricker and her book, Epistemic Injustice, and I'm giving you a specific chapter of it to read. With that said, let's go ahead and get into the slides. So we'll talk about who she is. We'll talk about her book, Epistemic Injustice, Power and the Ethics of Knowing. Testimonial Injustice, in particular, is what we want to focus on for this class. And we're going to get into chapter 2, Prejudice in the Credibility Economy. So content warning, there's going to be sexism. Just keep that in mind. And she's going to break that chapter into a few different sections, namely 2.1, Stereotypes and Prejudicial Stereotypes. 2.2 is Testimonial Injustice Without Prejudice. 2.3, The Wrong of Testimonial Injustice. We're not going to get through all of that today. We'll finish it up next recorded lecture. But with that said, we do have a lot, so let's go ahead and get into it. So Miranda Fricker, who is she? Let me go ahead and shrink my face and move myself out of the way there. But that is her. She is a philosopher. Oh, there you go. She's a philosopher from the UK. She teaches currently at the City University of New York, one of the best philosophy schools out there, or philosophy departments out there. And she works on moral philosophy, social epistemology, and feminist philosophy. So epistemology, again, is the study of knowledge. And we saw a very sort of traditional, according to Charles Mills, a very white male-centric epistemology in the philosophy of Descartes. And we saw Charles Mills sort of give his own social epistemology from the Black lived experience. And he talked about what we can know and the pressing problems about what we can know from the Black experience, namely, how do I know that I'm a valuable person within society? She's going to be doing something similar, namely, how do we know, or how do we come to know certain things or value certain knowledge? And how does that mix with the idea of gender, particularly with the idea of woman, or the gender of woman, She coined the term epistemic injustice, which is specifically a harm done against a person, not treating them as a sub person per se, and not treating them as a morally worse person per se, but it's a crime or an injustice that you do on someone else in their capacity as a knower. So when you, for instance, call someone stupid or dumb, even though they're very intelligent in whatever you might be talking about, in whatever subject you're discussing, that might be an instance of epistemic injustice. But of course, she's going to get more deep into it than my little example that I give right now. So epistemic injustice, according to her, has two forms. Testimonial injustice, it's harm done to someone's testimony. Testimony is not something that's only done in courtrooms. So we have to think of testimony as something that you do in court cases. Testimony is anything that you claim in a public space or to someone else, maybe even privately, that you claim is true, something that has happened, something that is representative of the world. And a testimonial injustice occurs when a prejudice causes a hearer, someone that's listening, to give a deflated level of credibility to a speaker's word. So you give someone less credibility than they deserve because of prejudice. And finally, there's also hermeneutical injustice. Hermeneutical injustice occurs at a prior stage when a gap in a collective interpretative resources puts someone at unfair advantage when it comes to making senses of their social experiences. So if you, for instance, were a woman in the 50s and you were told constantly that your boss is just being friendly because you didn't have the term sexual harassment wasn't termed yet, then you might have been going through hermeneutical injustice. You didn't have the collective resources to make sense of your reality and what was going on. Hermeneutical injustice is pretty interesting. It's pretty deep, but we're going to be focusing mostly on testimonial injustice for this class, which is chapter 2 of her book. So a little bit about her book in general before we get into chapter 2. So I'm going to need to give you a little bit of her definitions, her vocabulary. So she describes power, or a social power, as a capacity we have as social agents, people, to influence how things go in the social world, in society. And that can operate actively as well as passively. So for instance, a traffic officer might actively a police officer might actively use their social power when they pull you over and give you a ticket for speeding, but they might also exercise it passively just by sort of, posting up in a certain part of the street and making their presence known. And when people pass by, they say, "Oh no, a police officer," and I'm gonna slow down so people don't speed. So that would be them passively exercising their social power. However, she says this police officer works within a system or structure, and they usually always do. That's sort of what helps give them their social power. The system and structure we can see in the form of maybe roads, traffic signs, and of course laws, and them being deputized, being given the power by an institution that gives them the right to pull you over and give you tickets. Society gives them the power. The infrastructure gives them the power. Thus, social power, according to her, is a socially situated capacity to control others' actions, either passively or actively, by particular social agents, or sometimes even just purely structurally. Sometimes the agent, the police officer, maybe they don't even need to be there, right? Maybe they just leave their car there and they go off and get some food, some snacks, or maybe the city, the system, just puts a lot of traffic signs and a lot of stop signs and a lot of speed limits, and that is a way that they can already exercise their social power without even needing to be there as agents, purely structurally. So identity power, according to her, is any instance, any operation of social power which depends upon shared imaginative conceptions of social identity. So that can also be passive or active, as well as personal or structural, involving no people. So identity power, an example of this, might be actively telling a woman to be silent, which is bad, right? Versus an area where a woman knows that what they say won't be taken seriously, so they don't even try to sort of speak up. This would be a situation of identity power in action, particularly the imagined conceptions that women don't have anything useful to contribute to this topic or to this issue. Of course, and again, it doesn't have to be real, it doesn't have to be true, it just have to be an imagined conception of social identity that maybe women are bad at math, or bad at mechanics, or bad at cars, or whatever stereotype that might be. The problem with social power and identity power is that stereotypes, as we're already starting to see, create prejudice that is sexist social identities. The social identity not just of a woman having maybe some positive attributes to them, maybe being, I don't know, very caring or something, I don't know, but also bad attributes to them, such as them being dumber or less intelligent in certain topics. That's specifically what Miranda Fricker is going to get into. So before we continue, I think I'm going to go ahead and pause right here, and we're going to go ahead and get into testimonial injustice. Or actually, I'm sorry, I'm lying. We're going to go ahead and continue with this slide, and then we'll go ahead and pause. So testimonial injustice, according to her, comes in two main forms. Credibility excess, giving a speaker, usually a man, according to her, more credibility than they would otherwise receive without these prejudices. So if they were a woman or they were some other gender, they would not be given that much credibility by the hearers, but because they are a man, they're given too much, excessive amount of credibility that their expertise does not warrant. And there's also a credibility deficit, which for us is more interesting, more of what she's talking about, more of what she is interested in, which is giving a speaker, usually a woman, less credibility than they would otherwise receive without these prejudices. This can come in many different forms, undermining their authority and expertise, interrupting and speaking over them, gaslighting them, why are you acting so crazy and sensitive, saying that this is all in your head, telling them that I didn't say that, stop imagining things. Those will all be forms of credibility deficits, not giving enough credibility to what women say because of prejudice or stereotypes. Notice that both are injustices and even harms, but only the second one tends to have immediate negative social ramifications. Credibility excesses is also a bad thing, right? If you think that if everyone's giving you credibility excesses because you're a man, you might think that you're actually smarter than you really are, and then you might be called on your bullshit later on, and that might be very embarrassing. But again, it's usually credibility deficits, which are more apparent harms. So a very good contemporary example, present day example of credibility deficits that women go through is the rather new podcast that was just published called The Retrievals. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but I encourage you to watch this video that should be down below. In The Retrievals, it's a podcast about women, dozens of women that go to a Yale clinic, Yale University clinic, health clinic, and they go through egg retrieval. So there's a picture here on the top right about what egg retrieval entails. So you see a needle goes into the vaginal walls and it pierces through the flesh into the ovary in order to take out an egg, hence the name egg retrieval. Now, usually this is done with anesthetic because you're getting a whole needle going through you, going through your insides. Men, if you're listening and you're having a hard time how painful this might be, I guess the closest thing that we could sort of imagine as men is maybe a kidney stone, peeing out a kidney stone, only it happens very immediately. And instead of the kidney stone coming out, it's going in, right? Going into the urethra, which is, if you've ever asked a man who had to pass a kidney stone, it's painful. However, what they found in the Retrievals podcast at the Yale University is that dozens of women were not being given anesthetic when they were going through this process, and they were supposed to be given anesthetic because it's very painful. And they were dismissed one after the other because of credibility deficits. They were saying, you're exaggerating, it shouldn't be that painful, because the doctors thought that they actually were being given anesthetics. Here's what happened. A nurse switched out the anesthetic secretly and replaced it with a saline solution, water basically. And the women were saying, look, this hurts a lot. I don't feel any of the effect of the anesthetic. And the doctors just ignored them, dozens of them. Until finally it came out and was exposed that the nurse, I believe, was a drug addict, and it was exposed that she had switched out the medicine. So again, this is a perfect example of credibility deficit at one of the highest institutions in the nation, in Ivy League University, a Yale clinic. Go ahead. You can pause this recorded lecture and we'll continue next time. Go ahead and watch this PBS video on the retrievals and it'll give you more information regarding it. Until next time, bye-bye.